Hi, everyone, and welcome to AACG's Fired Up program. This is our free educational program on glass where we show the latest and most exciting things happening in this incredible art form. Before we get started with today's program, I just wanted to mention that if you are new to AACG's programming, we do have these Zoom programs every week of the month. The first week is our First Friday program, which is always free and open to the public. And the rest of the month is exclusive for members only. And we have some really exciting things coming up this year. Online tours of incredible private collections, a special behind the scenes look at the documentary that was recently filmed with Lino Tagliapietra, and a bunch more things that I know you will love to take part in. So if you'd like to consider becoming a member, visit aacgglass.org. I'll have Howard go ahead and pop that into the chat so you can take a look. We also have a few more spots available on our Europe trip, which is in August of this year, going to Prague, Basel, and Amsterdam. So I know you'll want to check that out as well, and that is also on our website. All right, now Colin, if you could go ahead, please, and start the screen share. I'd love to just mention a few things from our sponsors of this program.
Can you see that?
We can see that. Yep, perfect. All right, wonderful. We're so excited to have Colin Reid as our featured guest today. And Colin, if you'd like to advance to the next slide, I'd love to talk about the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. They are one of the sponsors of our Fired Up program today, and they are an enthusiastic supporter of the glass community. They have a growing collection, the largest in Indiana, with 200 selections on view in their glass wing, a 3,000 square foot space dedicated to the story of contemporary glass. And I can tell you from having visited it myself, it is a phenomenal museum, and every single piece in there is absolutely incredible. I also have to thank our second sponsor, Rago Auctions. If you want to advance to the next slide, Colin, please. Rago Wright is proud to sponsor AACG's Fired Up program. They appreciate AACG's consistent efforts in gathering collectors, artists, and gallery owners from all around the globe in a unique forum where works and ideas can be exchanged. Rago has been selling glass on the secondary market for over 15 years and is grateful for the support of this group. Their next contemporary glass auction is taking place on May 16th with a catalog available very soon on May 2nd. And I know that you'll find some incredible pieces in that auction. As long as you are not bidding against me, have fun, and I hope that you will check it out. All right, thank you so much, Colin, for being with us today. We're so excited to have Colin Reid from the UK with us to share his incredible work. He has quite a career to talk about, really exceptional new work he's going to show us, and I'm very happy to turn things over to him now. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, thank you, Demetra. Thank you to AACG for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. It is an honour to be invited to talk about your work, and I really appreciate that. So I am going to talk about the development of my work really from the very earliest days. It's not going to be a strictly chronological talk though, because I want to talk. I'm sort of grouping things. So I want to talk about my work for exhibition. I want to show you some commissions because not everybody gets to see those. I'd like to show you some of the amazing assistants that I've had over the years, and I'm going to finish it off with a film, which I had a very exciting project last year. The Victoria and Albert Museum commissioned a piece, and they wanted to make a film of the making of the piece from start to finish. And it's a 14-minute documentary. We spent a lot of time last year filming it, and I think it's a really great film, and I'm obviously delighted with it. And it shows the whole process of making a piece. So I'm not going to talk about technical stuff or technique during the rest of the talk because it will be covered in that. So I'm just going to start off. This slide is an artist called Hamish Fulton, who he's a conceptual artist, and the picture that you're seeing is not the artwork. He's a walking artist, and the artwork is the walk. It's not the photograph of it, the record of it. It's his experience that he has when he's walking. And when I started studying fine art in about 1970 at St Martin's School of Art in London, this was the kind of thing that was really, really popular, which I thought was very interesting. But it kind of rather begged the question of, well, why make anything? And I really wanted to make stuff. I like working with materials. I like working with my hands. And so I didn't finish the course. And instead, I basically left and traveled, lived abroad for a few years and so on. And it was several years later that I was kind of looking for something to do that, a skill that I could learn, a material that I could work with. And I stumbled across flame work, scientific glass blowing. This is a really old slide from the 1930s, I think, but the technique hadn't really changed. So it's making lab apparatus. And I did a 6-month full-time course and then worked in industry for a couple of years to sort of get the skill making stuff like this. And this is sort of second half of the 70s. But I always had in mind that I wanted to do something creative with it. And so I ended up making a range of perfume bottles, among other things. So quite modest pieces, they're quite small, but they were very successful. And I found that I could sell them in craft galleries and was able to make a living, and having a small studio to do lamp work or flame work. But I really was starting to get hooked on glass, but I wasn't really aware of what was happening around the world. It was really the studio glass movement was really starting to happen. But I knew that I didn't want to work on such a small scale, and so I went back to art school, and I went to Stourbridge, where Keith Cummings was teaching, to start my degree again, to do 3D design glass. When I got there, this was 78. The thing that was really exciting at Stourbridge then was what was happening in the kiln casting, kiln forming. I kind of imagined I was going to do blowing, but the minute I walked into the casting studio, I was just captivated by all these kind of crazy experiments that were going on, because none of the techniques had been worked out. People were just experimenting to see what you could do, melting glass in molds in a kiln. And this is the first piece that I made, which is very, very simple. It's window glass in layers over into a simple mold with color in between, so that when the glass melts, it goes into the form of the mold. And then when you break the mold out, you've got this kind of rather sort of not very attractive lump of glass. But when you start to cut into it and grind and polish the surface so that you've got like a window onto the interior, you really start to see the movement and what's happening inside the glass. A revelation, and it was a great place to start. And so I really very quickly sort of switched to working with kiln casting and focused on that for the rest of my time at Stourbridge, and basically what I've been doing ever since. But what I realized was that casting is very good at form and texture, but not very good at the kind of things that you can make with blown glass. So I started looking around for texture, and I found it, very close by. I lived in the countryside at the time, but in nature. So I started going into the woods and the fields where I was living with plaster of Paris and just making molds of things that I could find. And so this is a molehill. And it looks very kind of unprepossessing, I suppose. But when you get it back into the studio, you have a piece of plaster with this incredible kind of texture on it. And so I started making pieces like this. So the top surface is cast. I think this is cast from sand. All the other surfaces have been ground and polished. So this has become a kind of almost a sort of feature of my work ever since, really, this sort of contrast of very rough cast textures and very highly polished, highly finished surfaces. Another thing that I was learning here was that the veiling that you can see inside, which started off as a kind of something that happened that I didn't really know why and I couldn't avoid. It's where you've got surfaces of glass that melt together and then flow into the mold as a liquid. So you get this kind of lovely three-dimensional like smoke or veiling sort of moving through the glass, which is kind of showing you how the glass has entered the mold and flowed as a liquid. And that's something that I started to specifically work with to to introduce it, to try and have more control over it. So I graduated and I set up a studio. I was able to make a living from glass because I still had my perfume bottle business going, and kept that going for probably the best part of 20 years, because it meant I could make a living from glass and not have to compromise the casting work that I wanted to do. So this is a larger piece. This was actually in the collection of George and Dorothy Sachs. It's probably sort of mid-1980s. Which was wonderful for me. Sadly, the piece was destroyed in the San Francisco earthquake. But as a piece, if you were going to choose a piece to be destroyed in an earthquake, this seemed quite an appropriate one. So this is still the 1980s. I was learning how to make bigger pieces, how to cast them without the molds breaking, how to grind and polish on a larger scale. This was the first piece I made. I took a bit of time off after my first daughter was born, and then this was the first piece that I made when I came back, and it was just something that kind of felt right for the moment, and it's a piece that I've still got here at home. And then arches. So these pieces are probably sort of 18 inches high, not huge, but big. They were challenging for me to make at the time. And the texture on these is soil from our garden. So I just dig up a bucket full of soil and then make a negative shape with this texture on the outside, pour plaster in, and then I've got a sort of a positive form with the basic shape and all of that texture, and then by the process of lost wax casting, end up making it in glass. So arches are something that I always enjoy in architecture, the way that they're self-supporting and the way they sort of move from one point through space to another. It was during this time that I started to show my work in the States. I was incredibly lucky that Ruth Summers, who had Colin Summers Gallery in Los Angeles, invited me to show, and it led to having a solo show. I must say, going to LA for the first time as a young man to have a solo show was just incredibly exciting. I felt so fortunate, and it was great. There's some lovely collectors there, Sonny and Gloria Cam, Dan and Susan Greenberg, who were really supportive, and that led to a very good and wonderful relationship. Ruth was so supportive and you know, fantastic person to work with. And she introduced me to Maureen Littleton, and so they became my two sort of key galleries for a long time on the east and west coast, and very good friends as well. At the end of the 80s or beginning of the 90s, I was invited to go to New Zealand for a year to do a residency, which was fantastic, and I could take my family. And so we moved to New Zealand and kind of set up base there. And I wanted to make work that wasn't just, I wasn't just bringing the work with me from the UK. I wanted to respond to where I was. And the geology there, we were in Auckland, which is basically built on volcanic lava. So I started using basalt. So the black and the white bits in the top and the bottom of this is actually basalt that I got from a quarry there. And also looking at Polynesian forms in Polynesian art and responding to that. So again, these are probably sort of 80, maybe 20 inches high, something like that. When I got back to the UK, I worked for a few years. It was a recession. It wasn't a very easy time, but you know, I carried on. But what happened was about the mid 1990s, I started looking at using optical glass. So these are slabs of optical glass from Schott in the US, which I was able to get hold of. And it just, because you have this incredible optical purity and a very consistent type of glass, I found that I could make entirely different work. So it also comes in very big bits. So this is over half a ton lump of glass, which I've still got. It's actually the dining table that I'm sitting at now. I started to work with the optical qualities. So this piece is, I think, in the V&A, and it's what you're seeing is kind of an illusion. So the side at the right, which appears to be solid color, is actually clear glass. You're seeing a reflection or inside the glass of the texture at the bottom. And as you move past it, that shifts. So it has quite a sort of almost a kinetic quality. So I started to work very specifically with that. It was a really interesting thing to work with. And I started looking around for new sources of ideas for textures and so on. This is Gloucester Cathedral, which is fairly close to where I live, which was undergoing a major restoration at the time. And I was able to get up the scaffold and make molds of bits of medieval stone that probably hadn't been touched for hundreds of years, which was really special. And so I made pieces like this, which is using that texture as a starting point and then making something completely new out of it. This is same sort of idea. This is Burton Agnes, a small stately home in Yorkshire, it's Elizabethan, and they commissioned me to make a piece based on what I could find there, which is wonderful because I could sort of climb up on the roof and go into the cellar and just sort of roam around and look for material. And what I found was this figure on the right, which I really loved, and so I made a series of pieces from that. And then I started working with musical instruments, so cello scrolls, violin scrolls, and details of string instruments from a friend who restores them. So this is a piece which, it has this sort of optical shift, so that not all of what you're seeing is actually there. This won the Glass Sellers Prize in 2006, which was really exciting. The next few slides I want to show you are some commissions. So this is I was always interested in commissions, and it was always presented a huge challenge and tended to move me on technically in terms of scale, amongst other things. This is in Shanghai Public Library. It's about sort of 12, 14 feet high. It's a combination of patinated steel to support it and cast glass incorporating Chinese text. So I worked with a Chinese person on the text side of it, and it had to relate to the environment, which is a library. So text was really important. This is at GCHQ, which is the kind of spy headquarters. So this is in the entrance, and this is based on the Rosetta Stone, which is a very good sort of metaphor for code breaking. And the text is actually it's coded text that the staff at GCHQ came up with, and then they sort of broke it down. They broke the code, put it into the language, and then translated it into English. So it's got a lot of interest for the people there, and it's a bit of a test to see if they can actually do it. This is in a garden in London. It's quite a tall piece, about 12, 14 feet high, I think. This is in Paris. So I was invited to look at around an apartment that had been empty for a very long time in a very beautiful historic part of Paris, and to make something for this window. And I just actually, the client wanted to come in, but not to be able to see out because it just looked out onto a roof. And so I thought that there was something very kind of moody and evocative about just these old net curtains. And I decided to make some glass curtains. So you can see there, the wax on the right, actually bought fabric, got my mum's old sewing machine, made curtains, made molds of them, and then cast them. And I actually saw this piece last summer, and it's still there. And I must say, it's almost like prompt ploy. It's sort of it's a kind of illusion. You walk in and you see that you think you're seeing fabric, but you actually realise that it's nothing like. It's actually a really heavy piece. And then working with big leaves from a rainforest biome in southwest in Cornwall. I then got a commission, so you can see casting the leaves on site in plaster. I got a commission from Chatsworth House, which is a country house in the north of England, to make a piece from their banana palms. And so this is it's quite a chunky table. It is a cast directly from a big leaf on one of their palms. It's about 120 odd kilos of glass, so it's quite a heavy piece to move around. But yeah, it sort of really relates to the setting, and that is important for me if I'm working on a commission for somebody. And this one was for a client who his family is number 16, including his grandchildren. He wanted a piece called Family Tree to kind of celebrate that. and he wanted colour. And so I designed this piece, which has got 16 elements. It's about 6 feet high, praying that he didn't have any more grandchildren while I was working on it, because it wouldn't have worked. And made this piece, which is set in a kind of in a pond in an atrium in the very centre of the house. And then finally, on commissions, this was really special. I'm sure you can recognise some of these people, but this was actually the late Queen's last public appearance before she died in 22. And it was wonderful. It was the Royal Company of Archers, who is her bodyguard in Scotland, and they are literally archers. They're probably not very effective as a bodyguard. It's ceremonial. It was their 200 years anniversary and her platinum jubilee, and so they wanted to commission a piece to give her, and I got the commission. And this is the presentation. I must say she was really interested. She was very charming. She was on top form, very smiley, and she really liked it. So it was fabulous occasion. The piece it's quite small, and I wanted to sort of make it relatable both for her and for the Royal Company of Archers. So it's got their kind of regalia in it, and the text, which is "Happy to meet, sorry to part, happy to meet again," which is one of their slogans. So that's some commissions. So to return to work for exhibition, books have always fascinated me. We've got lots of them all over the house. And I like working with things that are sort of everyday objects that I'm just encountering in my day-to-day life. So here I'm making a plaster mold of books, and then going through the process of lost wax casting, this is the outcome. And I've worked with books in many ways, in different forms. This is a piece with it's horizontal, and then the top surface has been ground and carved and then gilded. And book tables. So this is a sort of a full table height with steel and cast glass, quite heavy. And then on my drive to the studio every morning, I live in the countryside, so I pass the farm and I sort of look at what they're growing in the fields. And one year it was corn, so I stopped and asked if I could get some corn to make a piece from, and this was the outcome. And another year they had a field of wonderful sunflowers, really huge seed heads, some of them. And so I made a series of sunflower pieces, which I'm really pleased with. This won the prize at the British Glass Biennale, and it's actually a piece that I've kept. So I tried to keep certain key pieces myself, so I've got a sort of a collection of my own work. So I've always had an assistant from pretty early on, and they've been absolutely key in helping me to do what I do. And I've had really wonderful people working for me. Mostly having graduated, they've come on to spend 2 or 3 years in my studio, and then have gone on often to do a master's at the Royal College of Art, or to set up their own studio, or both. And the majority of them are now successful, well-known glass artists, which is incredible, and it's such a great thing. So this is Emma Woofenden, who's got a really large installation piece at the V&A. She does these sort of kind of anthropomorphic pieces, quite big. Gail Mathias, she's course leader in glass at Plymouth University, which is one of the better glass courses here, mixed media piece. Bruno Romanelli. This is a fabulous piece. It's rather deceptive. It's quite complex, beautifully made technically. And then this is Karen Mork, who just spent a few months in my studio when she was studying. She's Danish, and I'm sure you recognise her work. Lovely woman. Fiaz Elson, she worked with me for several years and now has her own studio called the Glass Foundry in Stroud, where she does her own work and casts for other people and teaches and so on. And Sally Fawkes, who lives just up the road from me. And we've now got 4 glass casting studios in Stroud, because I've been here for such a long time, and other people have come and liked it and stayed and set up their own studios. So Sally Fawkes and Richard Jackson are in Stroud. This is Joe Harrington, these pieces cast from ice. He literally makes the form in ice, erodes it with salt, and then casts glass into lovely, elegant pieces, I think. And Karen Browning, who spoke, I think, last month, these are some of her bullet hole pieces, which have been these ones won the top prize at the last year's British Glass Biennale, which is about the best prize you can win here. So very successful, lovely work. And finally, Sarah Brown, who developed this work. This is all glass, incredibly realistic, and she developed it during lockdown. And has gone on to be, successful with it. She makes wonderful installations with it and so on. And she's still working on and off in my studio. Sorry, the changes I made some changes to this which haven't come through. So I wasn't going to talk about this, but briefly, going back to 2009, I took some time out and sailed to the Azores. Alone, which was a really powerful experience for me. I'm sort of sailed all my life. And when I came back, I sort of wanted to do something different. And I went up to Northlands Creative Glass in the northeast of Scotland, which is very sadly now closed, and did a workshop with Udo Zembok, because I wanted to really concentrate on working with colour. And he does architectural work. Mostly he does architectural pieces. He fills buildings, the windows of buildings, with wonderful colour. He's absolute master of colour. So I did a workshop with him, and then I started experimenting with using these types of colours myself. And a couple of years later, I was making work like this. So whereas his work is a sort of high fusing, these are fully cast pieces. So I'm absolutely transforming, melting the glass, and using these layers of very intense colour and clear to really get into the depth and intensity of colour that you can achieve in glass, and the movement, the way that it flows when it's molten. So the forms I keep really quite simple because there's so much going on with the movement of colour. So these are probably sort of 2 foot, maybe sort of 2'6" across, something like that. Quite heavy, some of these. This is, here you can see the piece on the left set up in the mold. It's all quite sort of meticulous. Everything's arranged in a particular way to get the outcome and so on. On the right is the piece as it's come out of I've opened the kiln probably 2 to 3 weeks later. And you can work on quite a big scale with this technique because you've got completely compatible glass, and that's the sort of piece which I'm still currently working on working of this sort. So now, hopefully on time, I'd like to show you the film, which is as I said, it's a 14-minute film. And what happened was that the V&A wanted to commission a new piece. They've got several pieces of my work in their collection, and they wanted a current piece. And well, I won't tell you about it because the film tells its own story. So I'll just sit and let you watch it. What I like about glass is its transparency. It's got qualities that other materials don't have. So you can work with the outer form of it, but you've also got an inner space, which gives you another whole dimension. I think that casting is just an incredibly powerful technique. It gives the possibility to incorporate found objects, found forms and textures into a completely new piece. I've found inspiration in nature since really quite early on. It's so rich in form and texture, which are very often my starting points. I'm a lifelong sailor. I really love it. And I've been sailing on the west coast of Scotland in the last few years. Being on a small boat gives you access to quite inaccessible places that you couldn't easily reach in other ways. And so I've found myself often in incredibly beautiful places, looking at this, just the wonderful richness of rock. In a way,
It's so abundant that we don't really notice it. We sort of see the beautiful landscape, but when you actually look closely at the rocks, they are absolutely incredible. And so I've been using that opportunity to make casts that I can then take back to the studio and then develop work from them. Any piece of rock isn't necessarily going to work. I'm looking for particular qualities that kind of appeal to me. This is volcanic rock, basalt, so it's fractured and it's got fissures in it. So that's something that can make a very dynamic form when you isolate it. I'll select the area that I want to work, and then I start mixing up my silicone putty. It's quite a sort of concentrated process, because once I start, I can't stop. If I wait for too long, it started to cure, and then the next batch doesn't stick to it. So I sort of have to be very prepared, start work, and then work consistently until I've covered the whole area that I want to make a cast of. The materials I'm using are completely clean. They leave no trace on the rock, so I'm not sort of leaving anything, and I'm not taking anything other than an impression of the texture. It's a completely non-invasive process. Then you wait for 10-15 minutes and start to peel it carefully away. You sort of work your way along, and it gradually, the whole thing releases, and you're left with a faithful reproduction of the form and the texture of that area of rock. So that's then my starting point for making this piece. Once I get that mould back into the studio, the first step is actually to make another silicone mould, but using a more traditional kind of silicone. The silicone putty is extremely convenient for working in the field, but it's not a long-lasting material, so I need a permanent and accurate cast of that. So that's step number one. Once I've got that, I can start to paint wax on. So I melt wax, and with a paintbrush, literally paint it on. I don't need it to be too thick, just so it supports itself, but it gives me a really precise impression of the form and the texture that I was attracted to in the first place. So I'll take that piece of wax and I'll start to cut it up, melt it, and gradually build it up into the form of the sculpture. The wax is only really needed for the texture. If I need to have bulk, I'll use polystyrene, for example, because it's just better for flat surfaces and for creating the bulk of the piece. I like working with my hands, I like to make things, and I stumbled across glass really by chance. Many years ago I was in Brixton Labour Exchange, and there was a sign on the wall that had a list of government training courses, things like carpentry and plumbing. And at the bottom it said scientific glass blowing. I was just intrigued, and so I found myself starting a 6-month full-time course in making lab equipment. And I did it with the idea that if I could learn this, maybe I could use it for doing something more creative of my own. And basically that's what I did. I don't draw the piece that I'm going to make and then make it. I sort of feel my way into it, looking at it, sort of standing back and sort of changing it and just getting the form to kind of feel right and to have the right balance and the right movement and so on, sort of coaxing the thing into life. I'll eventually end up with the finished form, which is what I want to see in glass. Once I've finished making the model, Karen Browning, my assistant, takes that and we'll make the refractory mould from it. What we're doing is to build a box around it, essentially, and seal all the gaps with clay, and then mix up mould material, so it's a combination of plaster of Paris and silica. And then carefully pour it into the mould so that the material is rising up around the form, not sort of trapping air bubbles. And then leave it for sort of half an hour until the mould mix is completely gone off. The wax can then be steamed out. You wrap the whole thing up in polythene, put steam into it, and gradually over a period of a few hours the wax melts. The polystyrene can just be carefully pulled out. Everything comes out of the mould. That then needs to be cleaned up, and there's always a bit of refinement to do at that stage. But eventually I've got the finished mould which is ready to go in the kiln. What I need to know is how much glass I need to fill the mould. So the way that I do that is by pouring water into it and measuring how much water it takes to fill the mould up to the point where I want the glass to get to. So I can measure the correct amount of glass and prepare it to go into the mould. Kiln casting is one of the oldest methods of forming glass, probably goes back 4,000 odd years. Long before blowing was invented by the Romans, glass was melted and cast into moulds, and basically that's the same technique that I'm using now. The mould goes into the kiln. The whole thing is fired up, so the kiln will probably take a couple of days to go up to temperature. It could go up much faster, but because I'm dealing with big blocks of glass, I have to take it up slowly and carefully so I don't crack the glass. Then it's melted at about 80 degrees centigrade. The actual casting is fairly quick. It only takes a couple of hours for the glass to completely fill the mould and take the impression of all of the texture and the form. But then it takes 2-3 weeks, depending on the size of the piece, to cool it back down to room temperature. That's a controlled cooling, and it's in order to relieve any stress in the glass. If you take it down too quickly in temperature, it builds up stress, which is permanent, and it will either crack in the kiln or it could crack at any point afterwards. It's not a good idea to be in a hurry with this process. You do need a certain amount of patience to make things like this. But eventually it gets down to room temperature, and then I'll open the kiln. With the refractory moulds like that, you have to break the mould away in order to get the glass out, so it's a one-off mould. Although you do an awful lot to set everything up based on a lot of past experience, when the glass melts, you don't really have full control over it at that stage. There's an element of chance in this process, which I like because it kind of leaves the window open to other possibilities. The thing that I've really got that I want will be the texture that's taken from the original rock and the basic form of the other parts of the piece. But it's the start of a long process of cold working. I've adapted an engineering Bridgeport milling machine for work with glass, so I can put the glass on and cut the surface back gradually. I might take several millimetres, 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes a centimetre off the entire surface to get back to nice clean glass, and to basically get all of the surfaces true and as I want them. As well as milling the flat surfaces, I'm also using a variety of handheld tools. They're mostly not really specialist glass equipment at all, but some of them are borrowed from the stone industry, or I also use automotive air tools, but fitted with diamond burrs, diamond blades, and a water feed. All these processes are done wet. It's both to cool the cutting, because you don't want the glass heating up and cracking. It also washes away the dust, because you don't want clouds of dust rising off it either. And I can carve it, cut it, saw it, really make some quite major interventions in it. So it's working in a very sculptural way with it at that point. I've got the basic shape at this point, but the surface needs to be refined more. So then I've got the flatbed grinder, so it's basically a big cast iron flat wheel with slurry, and it's grinding those surfaces back so that they're completely clean, flat, true. When it gets onto the finer grinding and polishing stages, it's on a machine called a reciprolap, which is a sort of vibratory polisher, and you do leave it like all day, day after day, and it gets it to an incredibly both flat but a beautiful silky kind of surface which is actually ready to polish from. And then the machine's washed down and the piece goes back onto it with a polishing pad and polishing compound. Once I've done all of that, there'll quite often be work on the detail of the texture as well, with small handheld grinders to just sort of, carve it and get everything as I want it. The polished surface is then more or less finished, but everything else during all of these steps has become pretty filthy and encrusted looking. So the next step is to mask up all of the polished areas and carefully trim back the masking, then sandblast all of the other areas to get that completely clean. And then for the first time, actually, you really see what the finished piece is going to look like. It's a really lovely moment. What I like about this particular piece is there's a kind of dynamic movement to it. As the light passes through it, you see an almost uninterrupted image of what's at the other side of it. But if you have the polished surfaces at a certain angle to each other, they act almost as a mirror. You get total internal refraction. It's almost as if you're seeing something inside the glass that's not there, and as you move around it, that changes and you get quite a strong kinetic quality.
Well, so that's the lovely film that the V&A made. That particular work that I've been making from spending time in Scotland, the Habitat have actually got a piece at the moment that they're going to be showing at the International Invitational in May. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to take them. Demetra, do you want me to move through these final slides? And
no, why don't we go first to some questions? Let's see. There was a question from someone that was wondering, are there differences between the different brands of putty, and is there one brand in particular that you recommend?
Oh yes, there's huge differences. There's only one that I know of. Silicone putty. I assume you mean the stuff I was using in Scotland, where I'm casting from rocks, sort of in the field. It's just called silicone putty, and it comes from this supplier in the UK called Notcut, N-O-T-T-C-U-T, or maybe the double T is at the end. I can't remember. But it's basically, well, you can see it's a two-part putty. It's not sticky. Most silicones are very, very sticky, and you pour them, and they stick to whatever they go onto. But this doesn't stick. It's completely clean. And I mean, I take it, if I'm traveling, I take it with me. I put it in my suitcase because I find I encounter things, and it's a bit like having a sketchbook or a camera, except that you can make records of things in 3 dimensions. It's a bit suspicious sometimes when you go through security. They often ask me, what's this stuff? It's a bit like plastic explosive. But yeah, I don't know if there's any other brands of it. I only know of this one. And I must say that quite a few artists, when they've seen the film, who work with silicone, they've said what is it? But they haven't encountered it. But you have to Google it. So it's called silicone putty.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Also had a question. Let's see. What advice did you offer your very talented associates as they sought to develop their own unique voices in glass?
I think that what is really, really good idea at the start of your career, if you've got the opportunity, is to work in somebody else's studio. Because when you it's wonderful going to college, and especially if you can do a degree course and you've got several years to really develop your thinking, develop a style, and really kind of explore without a lot of commercial pressure on it. But after that, you're going straight from that to starting a studio is really, really difficult. You probably haven't got any money, but you know, the market. It's a difficult step, and you only know what you've learned at college. If you can get to spend time in a studio or in more than one studio and see people that are actually doing it professionally, you know, for real, and you can learn so much from that. You know, not just technical things. I mean, just the way people work, about relationships with galleries, how the market works, and all that sort of thing. It's incredibly helpful. In terms of style, I wouldn't really. Yeah, I think that's such an individual and personal thing, and people sort of feel like that themselves.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see. How time consuming is it to do the piece that we saw? Maybe she's talking about the last piece. Can you do more than one piece at the same time? Can you talk about how you have been inspired by your ideas in nature? It seems you have an ongoing curiosity that led to the original works.
Yes, so yes, because all of the processes take a long time. So that particular piece would be, I think it's about 3 weeks in the kiln, most of it cooling, and I don't open the kiln until it's right back down to room temperature. So I've got several kilns, so I'll have, when I'm busy, I'll have several pieces at different stages in kilns. And then, like other periods, I don't have anything in the kiln, but because I only make quite a small number of pieces. But then the cold working process also takes time. So that's usually, by the time, I mean, if I take the piece out of the kiln, if I just did nothing else but work on that, it would still take me 2 to 3 weeks, because they're time consuming process. You can't hurry them up. And the grinding and polishing, when it gets onto the reciprolactic, I'm sort of babysitting it. I'm looking at, you know, checking it all the time, and I can get on with other things. So I kind of start different pieces and work on. So I've generally got sort of 3 or 4 pieces on the go at any one time, all at different stages. What was the other thing about the inspiration? Yeah, I just try and keep my eyes open, really. I mean, I had a trekking holiday in La Gomera, which is a volcanic island in the Canaries. It's a small, it's very undeveloped. It's really beautiful. And I took some silicon putty with me, and I was thinking of, because the rocks are wonderful there, but I ended up making a cast of the a palm tree. You know how all of the palms break off and they leave that very kind of, it's got a sort of a symmetry to it, but it's also a very rough texture. And that is looking like a really promising mold that I got to work on. So I sort of, yeah, I kind of like to use things that I encounter in my life. Rather, yes, that's kind of, and try and be open to things and keep my eyes open, basically.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, it's definitely a labor of love that goes into your work. All of the cold working, the polishing, it comes together so beautifully to create the reflections and optical illusions, and really the reflection of nature that we see in your work. So thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing all of that. If you want to just go to the next slide, I'd like to again thank our sponsors of this program, Fort Wayne Museum of Art in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which has an incredible contemporary glass collection. I really encourage you to go there if you are able to and check it out in person. And our second sponsor, Rago Auctions, which Colin, if you want to progress to the next slide, they have a contemporary glass auction coming up on May 16th, and you can send Suzanne Perot an email at the email you see up on the screen if you have any questions, or check out their website. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much, Colin. What I'd like to do now is just stop the recording, and if people want to stay on, they can talk to Colin directly and ask any more questions that they may have. Thanks again.